When I was in high school, I desperately wanted a puppy and had been trying to convince my parents to let me get one for years. My mom was allergic, so she said I could only get one that didn't shed, and one that wouldn't be any bigger than around 10 pounds. There was a mixed poodle breed that met these categories that was super adorable. I wanted it so bad, but it was a pretty expensive breed. Every day I would look online and in the newspaper, just hoping and praying that I would find one in my right price range. Months went by with no luck until one of my friends suggested I look on Craigslist. I usually never used Craigslist because I had always heard sketchy stories about it, but I was desperate, so I decided to give it a try. I scrolled through the website and was elated when I saw a listing for the exact type of puppy that I wanted. It had a price I could actually afford. I showed my parents, and they told me to go ahead and contact the person who made the listing and see if everything was legit. I did so that very night and found out that the puppy was still available at a location that was only about half an hour away. I know I should have probably asked my parents to go with me, but I was so excited that I decided to just go by myself the next day after school. I didn't want my parents to go back on their word or anything and not let me get the dog for some reason. I was about 5 minutes away from my destination when I realized this was actually a pretty bad part of town. I shrugged away my worries. I pulled up to the house, which I'll admit was sort of sketchy. I noticed that there was no sign of a dog living there anywhere, but maybe it just stayed inside most of the time. I knocked on the door, and a shirtless man answered almost immediately. He gestured for me to sit on the tattered couch in the living room. I was uncomfortable, but did as he said. He then began asking me personal questions, like how old I was, where I lived, and how tall I was. I was getting really bad vibes, so I tried to make my answers as vague as possible. After a few minutes of questioning, I told him I was in a hurry and wanted to see the dog, now. Eventually, he stood up and guided me to a room in the back of the house. He stood behind me and pointed into a dark room, gesturing for me to walk inside. I had a sick feeling in the back of my stomach about what was going to happen to me if I went inside the room. I turned on my heel and then sprinted past the man out of the house. I kept running until I got to my car. The man chased after me, banging on my car window so hard that the glass shattered. I put the key into the ignition and started speeding home as fast as I could. When I got home, I told my parents about what happened and they called the police. The police went to the house, but by the time they got there, it was already vacant. The man had made a run for it. The officers told me that he was likely trying to traffic me, and if I had not left when I did, I probably wouldn't have ever been seen again. I was a junior in high school when I was trying to make some extra cash to buy a car. My friends had made a decent amount of money by selling some of their old stuff on Craigslist, so I decided to give it a try. I had a diamond necklace that an old girlfriend had given me that I knew was probably worth something. I made a listing for it, setting it at what I thought was a pretty reasonable price. After a couple of days, a guy contacted me through the website. He told me that he was interested in buying the necklace for his girlfriend. I told him I was taking cash only, which he was fine with. He then told me we could meet up the next day at a local gas station. I had always heard that it was good to do these sorts of things in public places, so I was glad he suggested that location. The next day, I drove to the gas station he had told me to meet him at. I waited in the car for the man to arrive. Just as it was starting to get dark, a dark black car pulled up a few spaces down from me. A man in a black hoodie rolled the window down and asked me if I was the person selling the necklace. I told him I was. He smiled and told me that he had cash in the car and that I could come over and get it. I turned the necklace into my pocket and walked over to the vehicle. He opened the passenger side door for me, but I didn't go in, my gut telling me not to. "Please get in, it will just be a second. I've got to count the money," he told me as he dug around in the middle console. Hesitantly, I got in, but left the passenger side door wide open. The man rummaged in the middle console a little longer, rambling about how much his girlfriend was going to love the necklace. I was starting to feel even more uncomfortable when all of a sudden, the man snapped up and reached across me, shutting the door in a rapid movement. Before I could even process what was happening, he began driving quickly. His hands were crushing the wheel, and he didn't look at me once as I yelled and demanded an explanation. Was I being robbed? The necklace was worth less than $100. Who would go so far out of their way to steal that? Suddenly, I had a realization that made my stomach sink. Maybe it wasn't the necklace he had even wanted to begin with. Maybe it was me. I knew I had to think fast, so I forced myself to calm down and figure out what I was going to do. I realized the passenger side door wasn't locked, and my best bet would be to try to jump out. But the man was driving erratically and at high speeds, and I didn't think I could do it without getting hurt. Eventually, he got to an area where there was some stopped traffic. He cursed, slamming his hand on the wheel so hard I jumped. I took in my surroundings, and then I went for it. I flung myself out of the car onto the street, raising the attention of people in nearby cars. I began sprinting through the traffic, trying my best not to get hit. I could hear the man screaming behind me, but he didn't chase me. A woman in a minivan pulled up alongside me. She said she saw what happened and told me that if I got in her car, she would take me to safety. I saw her children in her car, so I knew I could trust her. I jumped in and realized she was already on the phone with 911. We ended up driving right to the police station where I explained what happened. The woman was able to get a picture of the man's license plate, and he was tracked down a few days later and taken to prison. I never used Craigslist again after that. This story happened when I was a sophomore in high school. My parents had this huge vanity that they wanted to get rid of, so they listed it on Craigslist. After only a few days, they had an interested buyer. Both my parents worked until after 6, so they arranged for the man to come to pick up the vanity around 7 p.m. the next day when they would be home. On the day that the vanity was scheduled to be picked up, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework. It was 4 p.m., and my parents were still at work. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting anyone, and the guy wasn't supposed to be here to pick up the vanity for 3 more hours. I went to the door and peeked out. A man was standing there that I didn't recognize. I opened the door and he told me that he was there to pick up the vanity. I explained that my parents weren't home and that I wasn't the one who was supposed to do the transaction. He asked me if he could just come inside and wait for them to come home. I told him that I was sorry, but I didn't think my parents would be comfortable with it. He continued to try to persuade me until eventually I just closed the door. A short while later, I heard more knocking. This time it was coming from the back door, which was completely glass and see-through. I was shocked to see the man standing at the door, looking in at me through the glass. I jumped up and pulled back the curtains. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy to continue to knock after telling him no. I sent a quick text to my parents letting them know what was going on. The knocking had stopped, but I was still creeped out. After about 30 minutes of silence, I looked out the window and didn't see anyone outside. Maybe he had finally gotten the hint. Suddenly, I heard what were definite footsteps coming from upstairs. I was afraid of what I was about to find, but I knew I had to investigate. Slowly and quietly, I walked up the stairs and was terrified to see the man standing in my bedroom. He had broken in through the window. "I told you to let me in," he said in a calm, even voice. I screamed and sprinted down the stairs and out of the house. I kept running until I got to the neighbor's house. I pounded on the door and they let me inside. I explained that there was a crazy guy that had broken into the house and the neighbor called 911. Luckily, the police arrived on the scene quickly and were able to capture the man as he was trying to escape in his truck. What would you have done in these situations? Drop a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe.